I never imagined myself as the type of woman who would cheat on her husband. Growing up in Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood, I was raised with clear expectations. Marry well, maintain a beautiful home, and uphold the family's social standing. For years, I played that role perfectly as Richard Thompson's wife. Our Tudor-style home in Brookline was everything I'd been taught to want: 6 bedrooms, manicured gardens, and a prestigious address that made my mother beam with pride. Richard's surgical practice was thriving, and our daughter Sophie attended the same elite private school where I'd spent my childhood. From the outside, we were the perfect family, but perfection, I was learning, came at a cost. Richard's dedication to his practice meant I spent most evenings alone, watching Sophie play in our expansive backyard, while I sipped wine and pretended not to feel the emptiness growing inside me. My art history degree gathered dust as I organized charity galas and attended endless social functions where the conversations never went deeper than designer brands and vacation homes. The first time I noticed Marcus Rivera, he was pruning the hydrangeas along our garden path. It was early spring, and he'd recently taken over the landscaping contract from the previous company. Unlike the usual crews who came and went without interaction, Marcus worked alone and took evident pride in his craft. "These need more acidic soil," he said when he caught me watching him. "The blooms would be bluer." His voice surprised me, educated, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Later I'd learn he'd studied botany in college before family obligations forced him to take over his father's landscaping business. "You know a lot about flowers," I said, embarrassed to be caught staring. He smiled, and something fluttered in my chest. "Plants are honest. They show you exactly what they need if you pay attention." I found myself looking forward to his visits, twice a week during spring and summer. He worked shirtless in the heat, his tan skin gleaming with sweat as he transformed our garden into something wild and beautiful. We'd talk while he worked, about books, art, his grandmother's recipes, Sophie's latest adventures. He treated my daughter with genuine interest, teaching her about different plants and letting her help water the flowers. Richard barely noticed the changes to the garden. "Looks nice," he'd say absently, rushing off to another emergency surgery. He didn't notice the changes in me either: how I started wearing sundresses on the days Marcus came, how I'd linger in the garden long after Sophie went inside for her nap. The first touch was innocent. I was helping Marcus carry bags of mulch despite his protests that it wasn't appropriate, and our hands brushed. The electricity between us was instant and undeniable. We both froze, eyes locked, the humid summer air heavy around us. "Mrs. Thompson?" he started to say, but I cut him off. "Emma, please, call me Emma." "Emma," he said softly, and my name on his lips sounded like a prayer. We stayed professional after that, but the tension grew with each visit. I found excuses to be in the garden when he worked. He started bringing me coffee from the local cafe, remembering exactly how I liked it. We talked about everything and nothing, dancing around the attraction we both felt but couldn't acknowledge. The breaking point came during a late August afternoon. Richard was at a medical conference in Chicago, and Sophie was at a playdate. Marcus was finishing up some pruning when a sudden thunderstorm rolled in. "You should come inside until it passes," I said, watching him gather his tools. "You'll get soaked." He hesitated, and I could see him weighing propriety against desire. "I don't want to impose." "Please," I said, and something in my voice made him look at me sharply. Inside, I handed him a towel for his rain-dampened hair. We stood in my kitchen, the air charged with possibility. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face. "I should go," he said, but didn't move. "Should you?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the rain on his skin. "Emma," he whispered, "if I don't leave now." I kissed him. Or maybe he kissed me. In the end, it didn't matter who moved first. The kiss was inevitable, like thunder following lightning. His hands were calloused from work but gentle as they cupped my face. I pressed against him, tasting rain and coffee and desire. "We can't," he said against my lips, even as his hand slid down to my waist. "I know," I replied, already pulling him toward the stairs. My bedroom felt different with Marcus in it, like we'd crossed into some alternate reality where social boundaries didn't exist. He hesitated at the threshold, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. "Your husband," he started. "Isn't here," I finished. "Hasn't really been here for a long time." That first time was frenzied, desperate. His work-roughened hands left trails of fire on my skin as he undressed me. When he lifted me onto the bed, I caught our reflection in the mirror. his tanned body against my pale skin, like some Renaissance painting come to life. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets, I traced the scar on his shoulder where he'd told me he'd had surgery after a landscaping accident. "This is crazy," I whispered. He kissed my temple. "Completely insane." But we couldn't stop. We found moments whenever we could. During Sophie's ballet lessons, between Richard's surgeries, early mornings before the neighborhood woke up. Marcus would work in the garden as usual, then slip inside for stolen hours that felt like minutes. The sex was incredible, but it wasn't just physical. Marcus really saw me, in a way Richard hadn't in years. He asked about my dreams, my thoughts on art, my fears. He listened when I talked about feeling trapped in my perfect life. "You're more than just someone's wife," he told me one afternoon, as we lay in the garden house, hidden from view. "You're brilliant and passionate and alive." I learned about his life too, how he'd given up his studies to care for his grandmother after his parents' death, how he painted in his spare time, how he dreamed of opening a nursery specializing in rare plants. He showed me his small apartment above his grandmother's house, filled with canvases and botanical sketches. The guilt was constant but manageable until Sophie almost caught us. We were in the kitchen, Marcus pressing me against the counter in a heated kiss, when we heard her voice from the hallway. "Mommy?" We sprang apart just as she entered, her ballet bag dragging behind her. "Mr. Rivera is helping me with the kitchen sink," I said quickly, straightening my dress. Sophie accepted this explanation easily, but the close call shook us both. "We need to be more careful," Marcus said later. "I won't let this hurt your daughter." His concern for Sophie only made me love him more. Yes, love. I had to admit that's what this was, even if I couldn't say it aloud. It wasn't just about escaping my marriage or physical attraction. Marcus had awakened something in me I thought had died. Richard remained oblivious, too caught up in his work to notice the changes in me. When he was home, our conversations were superficial: hospital politics, Sophie's school, upcoming social events. We hadn't made love in months, and he didn't seem to notice that either. One evening, as we dressed for a hospital fundraiser, he actually commented on my appearance. "You look different," he said, adjusting his bow tie. "Have you changed your hair?" I touched my neck where Marcus had left a mark I'd carefully covered with makeup, just trying something new. The fundraiser was torture. I played my role as the surgeon's wife perfectly, making small talk with other doctors' wives while Richard networked. But my mind was on Marcus, who had texted me earlier about a rare orchid he'd found. "Mrs. Thompson?" A voice startled me from my thoughts. It was Dr. Carter, one of Richard's colleagues. "I saw your new landscaping. Absolutely beautiful work. We've been meaning to ask who you use." My heart raced. "Oh, just a local company," I said vaguely. "I'll have Richard send you their information." Later that night, Richard fell asleep immediately, as usual. I lay awake, thinking about Marcus, about the life I was leading, about the lies piling up around me. In the morning, I had 3 texts from Marcus. "Missing you. Grandmother's recipe for paella. Thought you might like to try it. Found another orchid. This one made me think of you. Delicate but strong." I deleted the messages immediately, as I always did, but saved the recipe. Marcus's grandmother's cooking had become a connection between us. He'd bring me dishes sometimes, teaching me the Spanish names and the stories behind them. The affair continued through autumn, our meetings taking on a desperate edge as the weather forced us inside more often. The garden house became our sanctuary, heated by a small space heater Marcus installed. He brought blankets, pillows, making it cozy. Sometimes we'd just talk for hours, planning trips we'd never take, imagining a life we couldn't have. As winter approached, maintaining our secret became increasingly difficult. The garden no longer needed constant attention, which meant Marcus had fewer legitimate reasons to be at the house. We resorted to meeting in hidden places: his small apartment when his grandmother was at church, cheap motels outside the city, even once in his truck parked in a secluded area of the Arnold Arboretum. The sneaking around should have diminished the passion, but somehow it only intensified it. Every stolen moment felt precious, dangerous, electric. Marcus would touch me like he was memorizing my body, and I'd kiss him like each time might be our last. "I wish I could take you to dinner," he said one evening as we shared takeout in his apartment. "Show you off, dance with you in public." I was wearing his shirt, sitting cross-legged on his bed while he sketched me. The apartment walls were covered in his artwork, landscapes, botanical studies, and now, secretly, sketches of me. "Where would you take me?" I asked, playing along with our favorite game of what if. "That little Spanish place in the South End, We'd drink sangria, eat tapas. I'd teach you to dance flamenco properly. He set aside his sketchbook, crawled across the bed to kiss me. Then I'd bring you home, to our home, and make love to you without worrying about time or who might catch us. The fantasy hurt as much as it aroused, because that's all it could ever be, a fantasy. My world of charity galas and country club memberships would never accept Marcus as more than the help, and his proud grandmother, who still believed in old-world values, would be heartbroken to learn her grandson was involved with a married woman. The situation came to a head in December. Richard's hospital was hosting their annual Christmas gala, and for once, he insisted I attend. The board chairman's wife specifically asked about you, he said. You've been so absent from these functions lately. The gala was being held at the Four Seasons, and as luck would have it, Marcus's company had been hired to do the holiday decorations. I watched him directing his crew as they set up elaborate poinsettia displays, pretending not to notice how handsome he looked in his work clothes. During the event, I kept catching glimpses of him adjusting arrangements, always professional, always just out of reach. Richard was actually attentive that night, keeping his hand on my lower back, introducing me to important colleagues. It should have made me happy. Isn't this what I'd wanted from him? Instead, each touch felt wrong, each smile forced. After too many glasses of champagne, I excused myself to the ladies' room. Marcus was in the service corridor, loading empty boxes onto a cart. You look beautiful, he whispered as I passed. I glanced around to ensure we were alone, then pulled him into a nearby storage room. The kiss was desperate, hungry. His hands tangled in my expensive updo, my sequined gown crushed against his work clothes. Emma, he groaned against my neck. We can't, not here, but we did. Quick and intense against the storage room wall, my dress hiked up, his hand over my mouth to muffle my cries. Afterward, I fixed my hair and makeup in the bathroom, trying not to think about what I'd just done barely 50 feet from my husband. When I returned to the ballroom, Richard was deep in conversation with the hospital administrator. There you are, he said absently. Feel better? I nodded, sipping water to calm my racing heart. Across the room, I saw Marcus directing his crew in the final cleanup. Our eyes met briefly, and the heat in his gaze made me shiver. That night marked a turning point. The recklessness of what we'd done at the gala scared me. We were getting careless, taking bigger risks. Something had to change. We should stop, I told Marcus during our next meeting, even as I lay naked in his arms. He tightened his hold on me. Do you want to stop? No, I admitted, but I'm scared. If Richard found out, I'd lose my business, Marcus finished. My grandmother would lose her home. I know the risks, Emma, but I can't give you up. Neither could I, as it turned out. Instead, we became more careful. No more quickies in storage rooms or risky meetings. We developed elaborate systems, separate prepaid phones, coded messages about garden consultations, careful attention to scheduling. January brought heavy snow and with it, new complications. One morning, while Richard was performing surgery and Sophie was at school, I was with Marcus in our bedroom. The snow had given us the perfect excuse. He was supposedly clearing our walkways and checking the outdoor heating systems. We were lost in each other when my phone rang. It was Sophie's school. She had fallen during indoor recess and needed to be picked up. The guilt hit me like a physical blow as I rushed to dress, Marcus helping me search for discarded clothing. I'm a terrible mother, I said, fighting back tears. Marcus cupped my face in his hands. No, you're not. You're human. You're allowed to want things for yourself. But the incident shook me. That night, watching Sophie sleep with her arm in a small cast, I wondered what kind of example I was setting. Would she grow up to think it was okay to lie, to cheat, to live a double life? The next blow came unexpectedly. Richard's mother fell ill in Florida, and he suggested we all fly down for an extended weekend. Family time, he called it, a phrase that would have once made my heart leap with hope. I had to cancel plans with Marcus. When I told him, standing in the garden house while snow fell outside, he tried to hide his disappointment. It's good, he said. You should be with your family. You're jealous, I realized, surprised. His laugh was bitter. Of course I'm jealous. He gets to hold you in public, sleep beside you every night, be a father to your daughter. He has everything I want, and he doesn't even appreciate it. It was the closest either of us had come to declaring deeper feelings. The words hung between us, dangerous and tempting. Instead of responding, I kissed him, letting our bodies say what our voices couldn't. The Florida trip was a disaster. Richard spent most of his time at the hospital with his mother, leaving me and Sophie to entertain ourselves at the beach resort. One evening, after Sophie was asleep, he actually tried to initiate intimacy. "Not tonight," I said, rolling away. "I'm tired." He sat up in bed. "Emma, what's wrong? You've been distant for months." The irony of him noticing my distance after years of his own nearly made me laugh. "Have I? I thought this was how marriages worked. Two people living parallel lives under the same roof. That's not fair," he protested. "I work hard to provide for this family." "Yes, you work. That's all you do. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked about my day, my thoughts, my dreams?" He looked genuinely confused. "I thought you were happy. The house, Sophie's school, the social circle. I'm not one of your charity cases, Richard. I'm supposed to be your wife." The conversation ended there, with both of us retreating to our separate corners of the bed. But something had shifted. Richard started paying more attention, trying to engage more. He'd come home earlier, ask about my day, suggest date nights. It should have made me happy. Instead, it made everything harder. Each attempt at reconnection only highlighted how far we'd drifted, how different we'd become. And every gesture from Richard made my time with Marcus feel more treacherous. Then came the text that changed everything. I was at a charity lunch when my phone buzzed. "Mi amor, my grandmother found your scarf in my apartment. She knows." My hands shook so badly I spilled my wine. Excusing myself from the table, I called Marcus from the restaurant's bathroom. "What exactly does she know?" I asked without preamble. "Everything," he said, his voice tight with stress. "She recognized your perfume on the scarf. Started asking questions. I couldn't lie to her, Emma. She raised me." "What did she say?" His silence told me everything. "She's giving me a choice," he finally said. "End it, or she'll tell your husband herself." The next week passed in a blur of panic and sleepless nights. Marcus and I met one last time in the garden house, now cold and bare in the winter light. We sat on the old blankets, not touching, both knowing what had to be done but neither wanting to say it. "I can't let her tell Richard," I said finally. "Sophie, it would destroy her world." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, and I can't lose my grandmother. She's all the family I have left." "So this is it?" My voice cracked. "We just end?" He pulled me into his arms then, and we clung to each other like drowning people. "I love you," he whispered against my hair. "I should have said it before. I've loved you since that first day in the garden." The words broke something in me. "I love you too," I sobbed. "God, Marcus, I love you so much." We made love one last time, slow and desperate, memorizing each other's bodies, each touch a goodbye. Afterward, as we dressed in silence, he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "My resignation letter. I'll have another company take over the landscaping contract. It's better this way." I wanted to argue, to find another solution, but we both knew he was right. Seeing each other, even professionally, would be torture. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother, overcompensating for my guilt. Richard noticed the change, interpreted it as response to his efforts to be more present. He took me to dinner, bought me flowers, tried to recreate our early courtship. I played along, but everything felt hollow. The flowers he bought were generic roses from the florist, nothing like the carefully curated blooms Marcus would choose. The restaurants were expensive but soulless, lacking the warmth of Marcus's grandmother's recipes. Spring came early that year. I watched from the window as a new landscaping crew massacred my garden, cutting back Marcus's carefully planned wilderness into conventional suburban shapes. Each snip of their shears felt like a cut to my heart. One Saturday morning, I found Sophie crying in the garden. "They're killing Mr. Rivera's flowers," she sobbed. "Why did he have to leave? He made everything so pretty." I held her, fighting back my own tears. "Sometimes people have to leave, sweetheart, even when we don't want them to." That night, I made a decision. After Sophie was in bed, I sat Richard down in his study. "I want a divorce." He looked up from his medical journals, shocked. "What? Emma, we've been doing better," I thought. "No," I cut him off. "We haven't been doing better. We've been pretending, and I can't pretend anymore. Is there someone else?" I considered lying, protecting Marcus one last time. But I was tired of lies. There was. It's over now, but it made me realize something. I'm not happy, Richard. I haven't been for years. And you're not happy either, not really. We're just going through the motions. To my surprise, he didn't argue. We talked through the night, really talked, for the first time in years. about where we'd gone wrong, about what we wanted, about Sophie. By morning, we had a plan. The divorce was amicable. Richard moved into a condo closer to the hospital. We shared custody of Sophie, who adjusted better than we'd feared. The gossip in our social circle was brutal, but I found I cared less than I expected. I didn't contact Marcus. His grandmother's threat still hung over us, and I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. I went back to school, finishing the master's in art history I'd abandoned when I married Richard. I started teaching at a community college, found a smaller house with a garden I could tend myself. 6 months after the divorce was final, I ran into Marcus at a garden center in Cambridge. He was with a young woman, pretty and professional looking. My heart stopped until I saw the family resemblance. His cousin, I'd learn later. "Emma," he said, and my name still sounded like a prayer on his lips. We had coffee. He told me about his new nursery specializing in rare plants, funded partly by his grandmother who had finally forgiven him. I told him about my divorce, my teaching, my new life. "I never stopped loving you," he said as we parted. I touched his face, remembering everything. I know, I never stopped either. We didn't make plans, we didn't exchange numbers, but we both knew this wasn't really goodbye. Sometimes things need to die back before they can grow again, stronger and healthier than before. Marcus taught me that, in his garden, so long ago,